Florence Alexandra Carrinton was born into a world of luxury, privilege, and legacy. Her parents, William and Eleanor Carrington, hailed from families steeped in wealth and tradition. Their union was not just a merging of hearts, but also an amalgamation of old money and influence. The Carringtons and the Wellingtons were names synonymous with power, and their daughter was destined to inherit not just their riches, but also their responsibilities. Her birth was celebrated with grandeur befitting royalty. The Carrington estate, a sprawling mansion nested in the countryside, was adorned with flowers, lights, and banners heralding the arrival of the long-awaited heir. William and Eleanor had tried for years to conceive, and Florence's birth was seen almost as a miracle. The entire family, along with close friends and influential acquaintances, gathered to welcome her into the world. Among the well-wishers stood the formidable figure of Victoria Carrington, William's mother and the matriarch of the Infernal Factories, a conglomerate that had started with a single textile mill and had grown into a global empire. Victoria was a woman of steel, her sharp eyes missed nothing, and her word was law within the family and the business. She was known for her strict demeanor and high expectations, a woman who had little patience for incompetence. But something softened in Victoria when she first laid eyes on baby Florence. Perhaps it was the child's delicate features or the way her tiny fingers coiled around Victoria's, but the matriarch felt an immediate and profound bond with her granddaughter. Unlike her other grandchildren, who were often intimidated by her stern presence, Florence seemed to sense the warmth behind the tough exterior. From that moment, Victoria took a special liking to Florence. She saw in her a spark that mirrored determination. Despite her stern nature, Victoria began to spend more time at the Carrington estate, offering her guidance and influence even as Florence lay in her crib. She envisioned a future where Florence could take the reins of the family empire, carrying on the legacy with the same iron will that had defined Victoria's own life. As Florence grew, her grandmother's affection became more evident. While her parents were loving and attentive, it was Victoria's involvement that truly shaped her early years. The matriarch's influence was seen in the books she chose for Florence, the tutors she hired, and the values she instilled. Florence was not just being raised, she was being groomed for greatness. The bond between grandmother and granddaughter was strong, setting Florence apart from her cousins. They admired her but also envied the special attention she received. They could not understand what made her different, what had captured their grandmother's heart so completely. Florence, however, remained blissfully unaware of the brewing rivalries, basking in the love and guidance of her family, particularly the formidable Victoria Carrington. In the early years of her life, surrounded by wealth, tradition, and a grandmother's unique affection, Florence's journey towards succession had already begun. She was the chosen one, the heir apparent, destined for greatness, though she had yet to realize the full weight of her heritage and the challenges that lay ahead. Despite her status and the luxury surrounding her birth, Florence's upbringing was marked by a delicate balance between indulgence and discipline. Her grandmother was a paradox of sorts, known for her stern, no nonsense approach in the business world. Victoria was surprisingly lenient with Florence, unlike with her older grandchildren, on whom she placed heavy expectations. She allowed Florence the freedom to enjoy her childhood. She's only a little girl. Victoria would often chide Florence's parents, William and Eleanor. Let her have her childhood. Allow her to grow. Her voice, usually sharp and commanding, softened with affection whenever she addressed or talked about her granddaughter. "She's my little wildflower," she would coo, her eyes brimming with warmth. To Victoria, Florence could do no wrong, and she cherished every moment she spent with her, whether they were exploring the estate gardens or simply reading stories by the fire. William and Eleanor, however, took a more measured approach to raising their daughter. They appreciated Victoria's affection for Florence, but they were determined to instill in her the discipline and manners befitting her position as the only daughter of the first son. Eleanor, in particular, was resolute in her stance. She had endured years of silent mockery from the other wives in the family, who had questioned her worthiness due to her inability to conceive. When she finally got pregnant, the shock and envy was palpable. But Eleanor knew she had to prove herself, not just as a mother, but as a guardian of the Carrington legacy. "We must raise her right," Eleanor would insist, often to the dismay of her indulgent mother-in-law. "I will not allow her to grow up spoiled and ungrateful. She needs to understand the responsibility that comes with her heritage." William supported his wife's firm but loving approach. He admired his mother's indulgence towards her favorite grandchild and her undeniable influence. But he also knew the importance of discipline and strong moral value. After all, that was how he was raised, and he has turned out all right. So, together, he and Eleanor made sure that Florence's upbringing was not just about privilege, but also about character and resilience. Florence's days were a blend of carefree adventures and structured learning. Mornings often began with lessons in etiquette, history, and languages. Eleanor personally oversaw her education, ensuring that she was well versed in the arts and sciences, while also instilling a sense of humility and respect for others. The afternoons were more relaxed, often spent under the watchful eye of Victoria when she returns from the office, who allowed Florence to explore and discover the world at her own pace. The juxtaposition of her parents' disciplined approach and her grandmother's leniency created a unique environment for Florence. She learned to navigate the expectations of her family with grace, understanding when to be the dutiful granddaughter and when to let her spirit roam free. Eleanor's resolve to raise a well-rounded daughter paid off. Florence was neither spoiled nor resentful. She grew up understanding the importance of balance, of knowing when to listen and when to speak, when to obey and when to lead. She cherished the moments with her grandmother, who treated her with unbounded affection, and she respected her parents nonetheless for their firm guidance. As Florence matured, she began to grasp the enormity of the legacy she was part of. She was the chosen one not just because of her birthright, but because she was being molded into someone who could carry the Carrington name with dignity, strength, and honor. Unbeknownst to her, every lesson, every rebuke, every moment of indulgence was preparing her for the path ahead, a path that would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. In this intricate dance of indulgence and discipline, Floris's journey towards succession continued, marked by the love of a grandmother who saw in her a wildflower blooming with potential, and the guidance of parents who were determined to see her blossom into a leader worthy of the Carrington legacy. Florence was a free-spirited soul, a child who seemed to embody the perfect blend of her parents' discipline and her grandmother's indulgence. Even at a young age, she decided to be her own person, not easily swayed by the expectations of others. This independence was nurtured by the careful upbringing she received from both her parents and her grandmother. From as early as 5 years old, Florence exhibited a keen sense of perception. She could instinctively tell when someone was lying or being insincere. This uncanny ability often startled those around her, but it was a trait that Victoria, with her vast experience in the world, immediately recognized as invaluable. She saw it as a gift that needed careful nurturing. Florence, she would say, my dear, her eyes twinkling bright, you have a rare gift. The world is full of people who wear masks, and you have the ability to see right through them. But remember, knowing the truth is only half the battle. Wisdom lies in knowing when to speak it and when to remain silent. And under her grandmother's guidance, Florence learned to navigate social interactions with a level of sophistication far beyond her age. Victoria taught her the art of discretion, the importance of timing, and the value of observing before acting. These lessons were imparted during their many walks in the garden, where Victoria would weave stories of her own experiences, teaching Florence through tales and parables. As a result of this balanced upbringing, Florence became a child wiser than most in her age, and even those older than her. Her peers often marveled at her maturity and insight, seeking her advice on various matters, from school projects to personal dilemmas. While other children played games and engaged in idle chatter, Florence was often found in deep conversation, her bright eyes reflecting a wisdom that seemed almost otherworldly. One particular incident stood out in the family's memory of her childhood. During a family gathering, one of her older cousins, Peter, tried to impress the adult with a fabricated story about his achievement at school. Florence, sitting quietly in a corner, listened intently. When the moment was right, she approached Peter and whispered, you don't have to lie to make them proud. They already love you for who you are. Peter, taken aback by her perceptiveness, confessed to her right there that he was only scared of being a disappointment, or like her that doesn't have to struggle to earn their love or acceptance. But Florence had made him understand that most things doesn't come easy for her as well. She too has the fear of failing those who have this much expectation of her. But through one of the books she read, she had come to understand that doing the best you know with the best of intentions is usually enough, not for anyone's sake, but for your own. So I have decided that I will do things to the best of my ability with the best of intentions and move from there no matter the outcome, she had continued. She looked up at the still surprised Peter, who now had a look of admiration in his eye. She smiled and asked him in an innocent voice, have you studied to the best of your ability? Peter pondered on this and shook his head. After coming to a conclusion, he replied, I don't think I have. Why not give it your best and see how it turns out instead of lying about it? Florence said. Meanwhile, their voice was echoing into the main hall without them knowing, and the adults had paused to listen to their discussion. Peter had promised to try it her way. There and then he had made up his mind to be her big brother, because he is beginning to see that what his parents, especially his mom, had been saying about Florence were all not true. She seemed like a very likable girl. No wonder their grandmother adored her. This conversation earned not just the respect of all the adults, but also a newfound admiration for Florence. Her ability to discern the truth and address it with kindness and tact left a lasting impression on everyone present. This incident, among many others, solidified Florence's reputation as a wise and compassionate individual. Her grandmother's teaching had taken root, allowing her to navigate life's complexities with a grace that belied her age. Florence's journey was only beginning, but it was clear to all who knew her that she was destined for greatness. Life for Florence continued in its delicate balance of indulgence and discipline. She sought her own interests, sometimes straying from the rigid expectations of her family, which could be sometimes very burdensome. Yet she carried a deep sense of responsibility, acutely aware of the privilege bestowed upon her. Despite the pressures, Florence never allowed these expectations to overshadow her dreams of personal aspirations. She viewed the world as her oasis, filled with endless possibilities. As Florence prepared for college, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The future was bright and her aspirations were high. One weekend, she decided to spend time at her grandmother's house, seeking the comfort and wisdom that only Victoria could provide. It was a tranquil Saturday morning when the serenity was shattered. One of the servants approached Florence, looking worried. Miss Florence, you need to come quickly, please, he said, urgency in his voice. Fearing for her grandmother's health, Florence hurriedly followed him, her heart pounding. But the news awaiting her was far more devastating than she could have ever imagined. Her parents, William and Eleanor, had been traveling across the country inspecting their factories when they were involved in a tragic hit and run accident. The report said he died on the spot. The world seemed to stop. Florence felt the ground slip from under her feet. The shock was too much to bear, and she fainted, unable to process the enormity of the loss. When she regained consciousness, the reality hit her like a wave, bringing with it a flood of tears and unbearable sorrow. Upon hearing the news, Victoria had also collapsed. The formidable matriarch, who had faced countless challenges and adversaries, was now in a hospital bed, her strong exterior shattered by the grief of losing her son and daughter-in-law. The family's pillar of strength lay vulnerable, her health fragile. Despite her heartbreak, Florence knew she had to be strong for her grandmother. Gathering her strength and wit, she rushed to the hospital, praying fervently Victoria would survive. By the time she arrived, her father's siblings had gathered, their faces etched with worry and sorrow. The room was filled with a heavy silence, punctuated only by the occasional sobs and whispers and the beeping of machines. Florence found a seat near her grandmother's bed, waiting silently and hoping for a miracle. The adults seemed too absorbed in their own grief to notice her. Only her aunt, Bridget, came over when she saw Florence sitting alone. "Oh, my cherry," Aunt Bridget had said, wrapping Florence in a tight hug. The once vibrant and cheerful young girl now looked withdrawn and frightened. Aunt Bridget had always admired how William and Eleanor had raised their daughter. She couldn't imagine the grief and confusion running through the young girl's mind now, but she hoped that with time, Florence and her grandmother would find a way to heal from this unimaginable loss. As they sat together, waiting for the matriarch to wake up, Bridget held Florence tightly, offering the young girl what little comfort she could. Florence, feeling the warmth and reassurance of her aunt's embrace, allowed herself to shed silent tears, the enormity of her new reality slowly sinking in. Hours passed in a haze of worry and hope. Florence stayed by her grandmother's side, refusing to stand up or stay away. Her mind a whirlwind of memories and fears. The vibrant world she had once seen as an oasis now seemed bleak and uncertain, but she knew she had to be strong, not just for herself, but for her grandmother's sake, who had always been her guiding star. When Victoria finally stirred, her eyes fluttering open, Florence's heart leaped. The elder woman's gaze found her granddaughter, and a faint smile touched her lips. "Florence," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with love. "How long have you been crying, my sweet pea?" she asked, weakly trying to sit up. "Do you also want to end up as I am?" "Come here," she said, stretching her hands towards the grief-stricken girl. Florence, unable to hold back the emotions she had been keeping in check, rushed towards the open arms. and let go of all the control she had been keeping. Oh, my moon pie, Victoria called, rubbing her back. I will do my best not to die too, okay? So cry as much as you like. But don't allow yourself to hold back from letting out any of that pain, okay? There is still so much ahead, and we must be strong to overcome the hurdles. But for now, we are allowed to grieve and not to care about all those other things. Florence nodded, allowing herself to feel all those emotions she was scared of giving room for fear of breaking apart completely. But with her grandmother's guidance and her own inner strength, she would navigate this new daunting chapter of her life. The world was still her oasis, but now it was also a battlefield where she had to fight for her family's honor and legacy. They remained in each other's embrace, giving and receiving as each needed. Peter, who was rounding up his studies in another state, couldn't come home as a result of exam, but he stayed in contact as much as he could. Florence felt his love and friendship even though they were so far apart. He and Aunt Bridget more than made up for the lack of family support which the others were not willing to offer. Florence knew immediately after her parents' death that life could never be the same again. The positions her parents held within the family and society were coveted by many. Her father William had been the first child and next in line to chair the infernal factories, not merely by birthright, but because he had proven himself more than capable of handling such a significant role. Her mother Eleanor was the heiress to her father's fortunes, a position that came with its own set of challenges and rivalries. Florence had witnessed firsthand the rivalries and challenges her parents faced, both within and outside the family. She had been trying to build a life outside the family politics, pursuing her own interests and dreams. Her parents had supported this, providing her with the freedom to explore her passions. But now, with their sudden and tragic death, the liberty they had given her seemed vanished along with them. Her grandmother Victoria was fighting for her life, and Florence found herself thrust into a world she had hoped to avoid. The reality of her situation hit her hard. Florence understood the precarious position she was now in. The hit and run that killed her parents wasn't just a tragic accident, it felt like a calculated move. Suspicion and fear gnawed at her, making her question who she could trust. The people around her, even those she had known her entire life, seemed to wear masks of their own, and Florence's keen sense of knowing was both a blessing and a curse in this new reality. In the days following her parents' death, Florence moved through a fog of grief and confusion. The once familiar halls of the Carrington estate felt foreign and cold. Her father's siblings and their families gathered, ostensibly to grieve and offer their support, but Florence could see the underlying tensions. Whispers and furtive glances told her that the power dynamics within the family were shifting, and she was now at the center of it all. Florence felt a profound sense of loss, not just for her parents, but for the life she had hoped to lead. She longed for the freedom to pursue her own dreams, but now she was bound by the legacy and responsibilities her parents left behind. She spent hours at her grandmother's bedside, seeking solace in Victoria's presence, even as the older woman struggled to regain her strength. Florence, Victoria said one evening, her voice still weak but determined. You must be strong. This family needs you now more than ever. Your parents believed in you, and so do I. But you must be careful. Trust is a precious thing, and not everyone around you is worthy of it. Florence nodded, absorbing her grandmother's words. She knew she had to step up, to fill the void left by her parents, but the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. The hit and run that took her parents' lives loomed over her, a sinister reminder that someone, somewhere, might be plotting against her and her family. She needed to find out who was behind it, so she had to tread carefully, navigating the treacherous waters of family politics an external threat if there was. As she sat by her grandmother's side, Florence resolved to honor her parents' legacy while forging her own path. She would not allow fear to dictate her actions. She would use her keen sense of knowing to her advantage, discerning friend from foe, and she will rely on the wisdom imparted by her grandmother and her parents to guide her through the challenges ahead. Florence's life had irrevocably changed, but she was determined to rise to the occasion. The world, once her oasis, had been turned into a battlefield, but she was ready to fight. She was ready to defend that which she has been bestowed with, for it means her family's honor and her own future. The journey ahead would be daunting, filled with obstacles and dangers, but Florence Carrington was not one to shy away from a challenge. With her grandmother's guidance and her own inner strength, she prepared to step into the legacy left by her parents, ready to face whatever the future held. Weeks after the accident, the police department finally gave the go ahead for Florence's parents' bodies to be buried. They had been conducting a thorough investigation to cover all possible ground, which had delayed the burial. With the green light from the authorities, the burial arrangements went into full swing. Calls from her mother's family had been frequent, urging Florence to come over and be with them. However, she couldn't bear to leave her grandmother alone in such a fragile state. Instead, she invited her mother's relatives over. A few of them came and spent several days, but their visits were brief. Eventually, Florence decided to visit her mother's eldest sister, who was quite elderly and had been unable to travel. Florence's days with her mother's family provided a much needed respite. The warmth and support they offered were a balm to her grieving heart. She was reminded of the love and cushion of support her mother's side of the family always provided, a stark contrast to the tension and rivalry often present on her father's side. Despite her mother, Eleanor, not being well liked by her brothers, Florence felt a genuine affection from them. It puzzled her, why did they harbor such animosity towards her mother, yet seemed to embrace her? Was it because she posed no direct threat to their inheritance, or was there another reason? But whatever the reason was, Florence relished the time she spent with her mother's eldest sister and her immediate family. Their kindness and support gave her a sense of peace. When Florence eventually returned home, her mind was clearer and she began to devise a strategy for the challenges ahead. The funerals loomed large, and she knew they would mark a significant turning point in her life. She needed to be prepared not just for the emotional toll, but for the shift in family dynamics and the responsibilities that would follow. Back at the Carrington estate, preparations for the burial was in full swing. The air was thick with somber anticipation. Florence, though still grieving, felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would honor her parents' memory by stepping up and taking on the responsibilities that had fallen on her shoulders. The day of the funeral arrived, bringing with it a wave of emotions. Friends, family, and associates gathered to pay their respects. Florence stood strong, her grandmother by her side, supported by her aunt Bridget and other close family members. The ceremony was a poignant mix of sorrow and celebration, a testament to the lives her parents had lived and the impact they had made. After the burial, Florence found herself in deep reflection. The clarity she had gained during her stay with her mother's family crystallized into a firm resolve. She understood the intricate web of relationships and power plays within her family better now. She knew she had to navigate this carefully to protect her family's legacy and to carve out her own path. Florence sat with her grandmother that evening, the two of them sharing a quiet moment of remembrance and planning. We have a lot to do, Florence, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the recent ordeal. The world is watching us, and we must be ready to face whatever comes our way. Florence nodded, feeling the weight of her grandmother's words. She was ready. The days of mourning had strengthened her resolve, and the support she had received had fortified her spirit. She would face the future with determination, guided by the wisdom of her grandmother and the memories of her parents. Florence was immensely grateful that her grandmother had recovered fully and was almost back to her former self. The ordeal of losing her parents had taught her many lessons, the most significant being how brief and unpredictable life could be. With this newfound perspective, Florence made a life-changing decision. She would move back into the family estate and commit to her college classes from home. She wanted to spend as much time as possible with her grandmother, cherishing every moment they had together. The decision to move back home had pleased Victoria immensely, seeing her granddaughter's commitment to staying close and learning the intricacies of the family business filled her with pride and hope. Florence had always been a bright and independent spirit, and now, with the weight of responsibility upon her, she was ready to learn and grow in ways she hadn't anticipated. Florence's days became a blend of college classes and intense learning sessions with her grandmother. Victoria took full advantage of Florence's presence, establishing a weekend routine where she would show her the company books and teach her the ropes of management. These sessions were invaluable, offering insights into both the official aspects of running the infernal factories and the practical experience that could only be gained through years of hands-on involvement. Remember, Florence, Victoria would often say, managing a business is not just about numbers and strategies. It is also about the people, understanding them, motivating them, and sometimes protecting yourself from them. You have a keen sense for reading people. Use it wisely. Florence cherished this moment. She realized how much she had unconsciously taken them for granted before her parents' death. The loss had brought a profound change in her outlook on life. Now she was determined to make the most of the time she had with those who genuinely loved and cared for her. Her grandmother's teaching extended beyond business. Victoria imparted wisdom about life, resilience, and the importance of staying true to oneself. You will face many challenges, my love, she said one evening as they reviewed the financial report. But remember, you have a legacy to uphold and your own path to carve. Do it with integrity, with strength, and with dignity. The days turned into weeks, and Florence's confidence grew with it. The bonds she formed with her grandmother during this time were unbreakable, filled with mutual respect and love. As the seasons changed, Florence found herself increasingly involved in the day-to-day operation of the infernal factories. She attended meetings, learned to navigate corporate politics, and made decisions that could impact the company's future. And in the quiet moments, Florence often reflected on how much she had grown. The girl who once sought to escape the burdens of her family's legacy had now embraced it fully, understanding that it was not just a responsibility, but also a privilege. And in doing so, she had found her true self, a resilient, wise, and compassionate leader ready to take on the world. As the years rolled by, Victoria consciously did less and less official work, gradually passing the reins of control to Florence. Florence noticed this pattern, but didn't mind. She saw it as a way for her grandmother to rest more. What she didn't know was that the old woman she pitied had more work than anyone could imagine. Victoria often pretended to be weak, a ruse to better monitor the people around her, while functioning at her utmost capacity from the shadows. She knew the burden she bore and was determined not to repeat past mistakes. The real cause of her parents' death had yet to be uncovered. The police department has ruled it as a hit and run without malice. But Florence couldn't shake the feeling that there was a vital piece of information eluding everyone. She had stopped discussing her suspicions with anybody, especially her grandmother, as the topic always seemed to upset her too much. Instead, Florence kept her suspicions to herself, working on the matter secretly, unsure of who to trust. She often visited her mother's eldest sister now. The elder woman bore a close resemblance to her mother, just as Victoria did to her father. Florence knew the two women didn't see eye to eye, but she didn't fully understand why her elderly aunt always hinted that she should be careful around her grandmother. Florence trusted Victoria implicitly. She was the only person in her father's family she could trust with her life. She dismissed her aunt's warning as old time rivalry, especially since her grandmother did the exact same thing each time she planned to visit her aunt. The mutual distrust between the two women made it difficult for Florence to take their warnings seriously. One afternoon, Florence sat in her grandmother's study, going over the quarterly financial report. Victoria was resting in her room. Also, Florence thought. The door creaked open, and Victoria entered, her sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on Florence. How is the report coming along, my dear? Victoria asked, her voice steady despite her supposed frailty. It's good, Nana, Florence replied, looking up with a smile. Everything seems to be in order. Victoria nodded, satisfied. She moved to sit beside Florence, her presence commanding despite her age. Florence, remember, it is not just about the numbers. It is about understanding the people behind them. Trust your instinct. Florence nodded, her grandmother's words echoing the warnings she had heard before. Nana, do you ever think about what really happened to mom and dad? She asked hesitantly, knowing the subject was sensitive. Victoria's expression hardened slightly, but she softened it with a sigh. Of course I do, Florence, but dwelling on it won't bring them back. We must move forward for their sake. Florence nodded, though her suspicions remained. She decided to keep her investigation secret, not wanting to burden her grandmother or risk upsetting her further. Days turned into weeks, and Florence continued to juggle her responsibilities at the Inferno factories. With her private investigation, she delved into old reports, re-examined the details of the accident, and discreetly questioned those who might know something. Her instincts told her that the hit and run wasn't a random act of violence. There was something more to it. Determined to uncover the truth, Florence dug deeper into the mystery concerning her parents' death. She couldn't let the incident remain an unsolved puzzle. She needed answers, not just for her peace of mind, but to ensure her parents could rest in peace. This quest, however, meant she had to question the trust and loyalty she had placed in her grandmother and others around her. Florence began her investigation cautiously. She reviewed the police report again, looking for any discrepancies or overlooked details. She contacted the officers involved in the case, posing as a concerned daughter seeking closure. Their responses were polite but unhelpful, sticking to the official narrative of a tragic accident. Frustrated but undeterred, Florence decided to follow her own instinct and explore other avenues. One evening, while her grandmother was occupied with a meeting, Florence found herself in the estate's vast library. It was a place filled with records, both public and private. She remembered her grandmother mentioning that her father had kept meticulous record of business dealings and personal matters alike. Perhaps there was something there that could shed light on the accident, she thought. As she sifted through old files and documents, Florence stumbled upon a journal belonging to her father. It was filled with notes on various business ventures, meetings, and personal reflections. One entry caught her attention. It was dated a few days before the accident. Her father had written about a tense meeting with an unnamed individual. The details were vague, but the tone suggested unease and concern. I met with X today. Something feels off. Need to look into this further. The entry had read. Florence's heart raced. This was the first tangible lead she had found. Who was this individual, and what was the nature of their meeting? She knew she needed to dig deeper. but the journal alone wouldn't provide all the answers. She needed more information, possibly from the people involved in her father's business. Florence decided to reach out to her father's closest associates discreetly. She arranged to meet them under the guise of seeking advice for her role in the company. These meetings, held in quiet cafes and private offices, provided her with insight into her father's most recent activities and the people he interacted with before his death. There was a particular deal her father had been navigating before his death, and according to her findings, it had not been supported by many in the company. It wasn't going to be of much profit to them. It was a way of establishing renewable energy that is cleaner and cheaper. There was a young man who it was said to have discovered a very natural way of harnessing energy for light, machines, and so on. There was one name that kept surfacing in these conversations: Alexander Kane, a shrewd businessman with a reputation for ruthless tactics. Her father had been in negotiations with him for a significant partnership that had apparently stalled. Florence's instinct told her that Kane might have more information about her father's last days. Taking a calculated risk, Florence decided to confront Mr. Kane directly. She set up a meeting under the pretense of discussing business opportunities, and Mr. Kane, curious about the young heiress's sudden interest, agreed to meet her. The meeting was tense. Kane was a formidable presence, his eyes sharp and calculating. Florence maintained her composure, steering the conversation towards her father's dealings with him. She subtly probed for information, hoping to catch him off guard. Your father was a remarkable man, Florence, Mr. Kane said, his tone deceptively warm. It is a shame what happened to him. We had our differences, but I respected him greatly. Florence pressed on, her questions becoming more pointed. What were those differences, Mr. Kane? My father mentioned in his journal that he was concerned about something. Can you shed some light on that? Mr. Kane's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something unguarded in his eyes. Your father was a cautious man, always looking out for potential threats. We had some disagreements over a deal, but nothing that would lead to what happened. Florence sensed there was more to the story. She decided to take a bolder approach. Mr. Kane, I believe there is more to my parents' death than a simple accident. If you know anything, please help me out. I need to find the truth. Mr. Kane leaned back, studying her intently. Be careful, Florence. Sometimes digging into the past can unearth things best left buried. But I admire your determination. Perhaps there are things I can share off the record, he said. Their conversation hinted at deeper conspiracies and hidden motives, but Mr. King stopped short of revealing everything. Florence left the meeting with more questions than answers, but also with a renewed determination to uncover the truth. Returning to the estate, Florence found her grandmother waiting for her, a knowing look in her eyes. You have been busy, my dear, Victoria said softly. I can see the fire in your eyes. Just remember, some truths are painful but necessary for your learning. What truth, Nana? Suddenly interested by that cryptic statement, Victoria smiled and tapped the empty space beside her, indicating that Florence should sit. Exhausted from her seemingly endless tasks, Florence sat, her frustration almost palpable. My precious child, her grandmother began. There are things you may not understand now, but when you get to my age, you will have a better handle on why certain decisions were taken. I know you are digging into the cause of death of your parents. Florence jumped in shock. How did you know that, Nana? Let's just say I am not called the Black Widow for nothing. I have my webs everywhere there. You should have just come to me instead of running around like a headless chicken. You should know I would never for the world hurt you in any way, she said, her eyes betraying a hint of sadness or maybe disappointment. Florence looked down at her hands, feeling torn between her aunt's words and that of her grandmother's. I'm sorry, Nana, she said at last, looking up at her grandmother's face. I just wanted to do this on my own. I didn't want to get anyone involved. Why, my child? Even me? Victoria asked. Well, I didn't want to put anyone in danger, especially you. Victoria busted out laughing. Oh, you precious thing, she said, her laughter subsiding. I'm sorry for laughing out like that, but it gladdens my heart that my little munchkin is growing into such a fierce protector. Don't mock me, please, Florence interjected, feeling miffed. No, my child, I would never. I meant every word I said. You used to be the one who needed protecting, and now see, you are all grown up and ready to shield everyone else. I laughed because you caught me off guard, and I see so much of your parents in you, giving me such hope that even if I was to die today, what I have built with my blood and sweat will not be destroyed. But I'm still here, so don't carry all that burden by yourself yet. You will have plenty time to do that in the near future, for your path will be a lonely one when I am gone. So I want you to trust me a little more, and we can together conquer whatever it is that stands against us. Okay? Florence nodded. She was ready to face whatever came next, but she turned to her grandmother and said, Will you trust me too, Nana, and tell me whatever I need to know? Of course. Trust is a two-way street, so if I'm demanding for it, I must be willing to give it as well. So, what do you want to know? Well, Florence began, do you know the real truth concerning my parents' death? Um, you could say that, Victoria began gingerly. But I must have you know that whatever decision I made was solely with your safety in mind. I couldn't lose you too. Florence nodded, now anticipating whatever her grandmother had to say, even though apprehension was eating up her spine. Maybe she didn't need to do all the running she had done. When the answer was with her under the same roof, Victoria began slowly, choosing her words with care. Your parents' death was not an accident, Florence. It was a calculated move by someone who wanted to destabilize her family and gain control of the infernal factories. Florence's heart pounded in her chest. Who would do such a thing and why? Well, the who is a bit more complicated, Victoria replied. But the why is, of course, power and control. What else could it be? Your father had many rivals, both within the family and outside. One of the most dangerous was Alexander Kane. Florence's eyes widened. I met him just today. He hinted at knowing more than he let on, but didn't reveal much. Victoria nodded. Kane is a master manipulator. He has always had his eyes on our businesses, wanting to take control. Your father discovered something about Kane's dealings that put him in a precarious position. That is why they had that tense meeting just before the accident. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Florence asked, a hint of frustration in her voice. I wanted to protect you, my love, Victoria said gently. After the accident and my recovery from the shock, I had to make sure that you were safe. That was my only priority. There were threats I couldn't allow get close to you. I feigned weakness to keep a closer watch on everyone. But what now, Nana? Florence asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. What do we do with this information? Victoria looked at her granddaughter with pride and sorrow. Now we fight back. We gather evidence, we expose the truth, and we make sure those responsible are held accountable. But we must be cautious. Trust is rare in these times. Florence took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and a renewed sense of purpose. I am ready, Nana. Whatever it takes, I am ready to uncover the truth and protect our family. Victoria smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know. Together we will face this and come out stronger. With a newfound alliance forged in truth and trust. Florence and Victoria set out to uncover the full scope of the conspiracy. They would need to tread carefully, gathering evidence and allies, ready to face powerful adversaries who had upended their lives. For Florence, the journey ahead was fraught with danger but also with the promise of justice for her parents. She had her grandmother's wisdom and her own tenacity to guide her. And as they prepared for the battle ahead, she felt a deep sense of resolve. The truth would be revealed, and her parents' legacy would be defended no matter the cost. Florence and Victoria knew that taking on Alexander Kane and uncovering the full truth behind the conspiracy would require allies. They needed people they could trust, those who had both the skills and the loyalty to help them navigate the dangerous waters ahead. Florence reached out to a few of her father's most trusted associates. She began with Robert Mitchell, a seasoned lawyer who had worked closely with her father. Over coffee in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe, Florence explained her suspicions and the need for discreet distance. Robert listened intently, his expression grave. Your father was a good man, Florence. If there is anything I can do to uncover the truth, you have my support. Next, Florence approached Lydia, her father's former executive, now retired. Lydia had always been like an aunt to Florence, and her loyalty to the family was unwavering. She provided Florence with valuable insight into her father's business dealings and the people involved. With Robert and Lydia on their side, Florence and Victoria felt more prepared to tackle the challenges ahead. They also enlisted the help of a private investigator, Mr. Olawaju, a former police detective with a reputation for uncovering hidden truths. Mr. Olawaju began his investigation by revisiting the report that has been made concerning the accident, reviewing all the original police documents. His experienced eye quickly spotting inconsistencies and overlooked details. He discovered that the hit-and-run vehicle had been reported stolen just days before the accident and then abandoned miles away, suggesting a deliberate attempt to cover tracks. Meanwhile, Florence and Lydia worked together to go through her father's business record. They found references to a secret project her father had been working on, a project that involved substantial investment and posed a significant threat to Alexander Kane's interests. Mr. Olawaju dug deeper into Kane's background, uncovering a web of shady deals and corrupt practices. He found connections to key figures in law enforcement and the local government, explaining how the investigation into the accident would have been influenced or deliberately mishandled. Armed with new evidences, Florence and Victoria planned their next move carefully. They decided to confront Kane publicly, using a shareholders' meeting as their stage. The goal was to expose his involvement and force him to face justice. Because they know how much of the law enforcement he has in his pocket, even the justice system were not safe. So they decided to bring it to the people so that there will be fairness. The day of the meeting arrived. Florence stood confidently before the assembled shareholders, her grandmother by her side. She began her presentation by outlining the company's recent successes and future plans, but soon shifted the focus to the suspicious circumstances surrounding her parents' death. Florence presented the evidence Mr. Olawaju had uncovered, showing the stolen vehicle's connection to Kane and the inconsistencies in the police report. The room buzzed with murmurs as the shareholders absorbed the shocking revelation. Kane, visibly unsettled, tried to dismiss the accusation. This is absurd. You have no proof, just wild speculations. Florence remained calm. We have more than speculations, Mr. Kane. We have solid evidence and we are prepared to take it to the authorities and the general public. The tide turned as other shareholders, swayed by the compelling evidence and their own mistrust of Mr. Kane, began to voice their support for Florence and Victoria. Kane's influence crumbled before their eyes. With the support of the shareholders, Florence and Victoria filed a formal complaint against Kane, backed by the evidences that Mr. Olariwaju had gathered. The authorities, now under public scrutiny, had no choice but to reopen the case. Gaines' allies in law enforcement and the justice were exposed and removed from their positions. As the investigation progressed, more of Kane's illicit activities came to light. He was eventually arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including conspiracy and corruption. The truth about the orchestrated hit and run that killed Florence's parents finally emerged, bringing some measure of closure to the family. With justice served, Florence focused on leading the final factories into a new era. She introduced reforms to improve transparency and accountability within the company, ensuring that such a betrayal would never happen again. Victoria, proud of her granddaughter's strength and determination, gradually stepped back from her shadowy oversight. She trusted Florence to lead with integrity and wisdom, knowing that the future of their family and their business was in capable hands. Florence continued to visit her mother's eldest sister, maintaining the bond with her maternal home. She understood now the importance of all her family connections and the strength they provided her. In the years that followed, Florence transformed the Infernal factories into a beacon of innovation and ethical business practices. Her leadership inspired a new generation, and her parents' legacy lived on through her tireless efforts. Surrounded by trusted allies and a supportive family, Florence felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had uncovered the truth, avenged her parents, and carved out her own path. The burdens of the past had been lifted, and the future was bright with promise. And so Florence Carrington stood as a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of family. She had faced the shadows of her past and emerged stronger, ready to embrace the world with open arms and an unbreakable spirit. The end.